The Democratic Alliance has introduced a bill which seeks to devolve national powers to the Western Cape. The Cape Independence Advocacy Group has praised the decision, claiming that it is in the best interests of the citizens. However, the organization is calling for work to be done by tabling two additional bills. One, the Western Cape People's Bill, and the Referendum Bill. Phil Craig joins us to discuss this further. Phil, thank you very much for your time. You say in your statement that the Western Cape Powers Bill will force the Western Cape government to pursue greater autonomy, but it will not on its own deliver it. What does that mean?
Well, so look, it's a very significant piece of legislation, and we're absolutely delighted that the DA have tabled this legislation. But effectively, let's call this push legislation. So up until now, the Western Cape government has been, as a political decision, pursuing greater autonomy. And this bill will now change that, and it will make it mandatory for the Western Cape government to pursue additional devolved powers. It makes them assess which powers are required by the provincial government to act in the best interests of the people of the Western Cape. And then it forces them by law then to pursue all legal avenues to obtain those powers. So from that point of view, it's fantastic. But it doesn't provide a mechanism by which those powers can actually be obtained. It relies on Section 238 of the Constitution, which says that the national government may devolve powers rather than must. And the other bill, which actually has already been announced by the Freedom Front Plus, is the Western Cape People's Bill, and that's the complementary bill. And that is the bill that asserts the right of self-determination for the people of the Western Cape, and therefore then says that they have the absolute right, guaranteed in international law and assured through the South African Constitution, to claim those rights for themselves so that they can demand the devolution. So the two bills work together.
What is best interest when you speak of the best interest of the people of the Western Cape?
Well, I think we all understand that South Africa has some very, very severe problems. Ultimately, what is in the best interest for the people of the Western Cape ultimately is a democratic decision for them to make themselves. We've seen in 2019 that the Western Cape elected a government that was committed to devolution of powers. At that point, it was focusing on policing and electricity and rail, and I think that's still one of the primary focuses there. And I'm sure there are other powers that the Western Cape government would also like to get. And what's in the best interest? Well, we understand that South Africa's got terrible unemployment, we've got this electricity crisis, we've got poverty, we've got people living in shacks, and all of those things need to be addressed, and the national government has proved itself utterly inept at doing that. The people of the Western Cape don't want to be governed by that government. They've made that clear, and the majority of Western Cape voters since 1994 have never once voted for the ANC, who've been the national government throughout, and actually they want to have those problems solved so that they can all live a better life.
Speaking of a better life, and you speak of government being inept on a national level, that same argument could be said for the government of the Western Cape, or the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape, in that it has not been inclusive. You speak of people who live on shacks. There's no doubt an eyesore for some, but it's a reality for many people when you enter the Western Cape from the airport, who feel that, well, their needs have also not been catered for. And so who are the people whose best interest will then be served?
Well, I think the Western Cape is an entity that's constituted in the South African Constitution. Its territory is clearly defined, and who belongs to the Western Cape is clearly defined. And we've got 7 million plus minus people in the Western Cape. We've got 3.2 million voters, and they make those decisions democratically themselves at the ballot box. So it includes everybody, regardless of race, religion, and culture. So look, I think it's quite clear who the Western Cape people are. That's clearly defined in the Constitution.
Who are some of the legal experts or people that are behind maybe your organization, for instance?
Well, so look, I mean, we're a voluntary organisation, so lots of different people get involved, and you know, obviously it's up to them to declare their hand rather than us. I think from our point of view, we put forward legal opinions and what we believe the legal position to be, and we stand by that. And obviously we're certainly open to other people. In fact, we're inviting discussion and promoting discussion. So I don't want to name the legal experts; they must name themselves. But I mean, there are some very, very significant names involved behind the scenes in both of these pieces of legislation.
What is your understanding of South Africa's history? Devolution has a history in South Africa, with centralizing power being a key concern for the National Party, for instance, in 1948. And we all know how that worked out. So what is your understanding or appreciation of South Africa's history?
Well, look, I think, first of all, I would say South Africa's future is far more important than South Africa's history. But I think it's a fair and a valid question. And the answer is that South Africa is now 113 years old. And for all of those 113 years, somebody has been in the centre of South Africa, dominating other people to their detriment. Initially, it was the British through colonialism. Then it was the National Party through apartheid. And now we've got the ANC. And the answer clearly is that one central government with all of the power in Pretoria is always a disaster for someone, and at the moment it's a disaster for everyone, other than the very, very small politically collected ANC clique. And the devolution of powers, or the decentralisation of powers, will serve everybody's best interest, and it absolutely shouldn't just be the Western Cape. I think we see the Western Cape here as the catalyst for this, and I think what this is going to lead to is the federalisation of South Africa in some form, and that is going to be to the benefit of all South Africans everywhere.
Phil, you correctly say that the future of South Africa is quite important, and the history, well, we should... I do not want to misquote you, but I think what I understood from you is that we should not look at the past, but rather look at moving forward. But the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, it said. Devolution became a strategy to insulate white minorities from the black majority in South Africa, hence the question on understanding or appreciation of South Africa's history. And it could be very well argued that in present-day South Africa, that is still happening, more so in that province, where not everybody enjoys the best interest that you speak of.
Well, look, of course it's level. This is South Africa, and at some point everything is reduced to race. I think, first of all, we have to understand that the Western Cape has got an electorate. There are 3.2 million people there. They aren't divided in the electoral roll by their race. They collectively make decisions, and those decisions are binding on everybody, and therefore this isn't a racial issue. If we're talking about the best interest, I always think the greatest measure of any policy is not what do politicians say, not what do academics say, not what people like I say, but what do people say with their feet? And the reality is, we've seen more than 1 million people migrating to the Western Cape over the last 10 years. So clearly, conditions in the Western Cape are significantly better than the places where people are migrating from. And I think that's a feather in the cap of the Western Cape government, the DA-led Western Cape government. And I think they've done very, very well. Clearly, there's an awful lot of work to be done. But I think we've got to be very careful of sort of trying to hold the Western Cape to a different standard of account to the rest of the country. The Western Cape is doing very well in terrible conditions. It certainly isn't perfect. There's an awful lot of work to be done. But I think we shouldn't just try to reduce this to race. I think we should focus on democracy and what do the people of the Western Cape want, and what they want democratically should be what they should get.
Do we know what is behind that migration? What does the data say in terms of why those millions people moved to the Western Cape? What was the attraction?
Well, look, I suspect, the Western Cape, first and foremost, has got an unemployment rate, an expanded rate, that's roughly half of any other province. So I think, first and foremost, economic opportunity is at the heart of migration to the Western Cape. And we've got, in the Western Cape government, we've got a government that's much more business-friendly, much more pragmatic, and it sort of tries not to get bogged down in this outdated ideology that is so destructive, which is the signature of this national government, and the reason why we've got so little economic growth, such chronic unemployment, such poverty, and why inequality has increased in the last 30 years rather than reduced. And that's a very shameful record for this national government.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group.